And the teacher said, there's a term called recidivism. Does anyone know what that is? And Dave yells out, repeat offender, just like the guy in the movie says, because he's seen Raising Arizona 1,000 times and knows it back and forth. So when he heard that movie, he immediately said out loud, repeat offender. And the teacher goes, yes, that's right. Good job, Dave. All because he's seen this movie so much.
Yeah, that's great. You are listening to the Silver Screen Happy Hour. I'm Chris Wiegand, along with my brother Jerome.
Here and unhappy.
So, yeah, since the last time we recorded, you and I are both in new studios, and we're working out some technical difficulties. It's been a
difficulties is the nice way of putting it.
I already cracked my beer.
With the money spent in this fucking box that I built, which is awesome, by the way. I know the viewers can't see it yet. There will be eventually. We're going to go video and you'll be able to see it. I have this pimped out studio.
Oh, it's sexy.
It's awesome, man. But apparently in this box, the internet speed is so bad that we can't even do video at the same time right now, or it would crash the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're going to give this a shot and see how it goes. So, I was excited to get this first one recorded. This is the first time we're recording in these new studios, and ironically, I moved out of an actual room that was my studio into a closet, and you moved out of a closet into a brand new room that you built. And so anyways, I think this is going to work. So what movies are we going to be discussing today?
So today we are doing a couple of, I was going to say crime movies, but they are Coen Brothers films that involve crime. The reason why I emphasize that is I'm going to pair it with my drink. Before I do that, I'm going to just tell you the names of the movies. We're doing the 1987 Raising Arizona.
Yes.
And the 1996 Fargo. So two Coen Brothers classics today. And this is actually a good one for any beginning writer or anybody that's just a fan of these films, because the Coen Brothers don't write scripts traditionally. They don't do what you're quote-unquote supposed to do. They break all the rules of screenwriting, and yet somehow their films fucking work, and they work amazingly. So I was really looking forward to today. I'm really dug in on these two. But first, before we get to your booze, I'm going to tell you mine. I am going to apologize to the makers of Larceny.
Oh.
Who I believe we did Larceny on a previous episode.
Yeah.
Or we just talked about it. You did Larceny.
I had Larceny, yeah.
And I bashed it because I hated it. But then I got this bottle. It is a stronger, let me see. It's 125 proof.
Wow. So like cask strength or something?
Yeah, it's like 63% alcohol. It's actually 126 proof. It says barrel proof John E. Fitzgerald Larceny. It's a special edition Larceny that's stronger. And I've already tried it, and it's actually really good. So
you know why? You know why you like it more? Yeah. It burns your taste buds off.
Well, and here's what I think happened. I think the makers of Larceny listened to our previous episode where I bashed it.
Yeah,
they found a way to get this in my hands.
We got to up our game.
So here we go. I don't know if you heard that.
Oh, yeah.
Let's do this. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Did you hear the pour?
Mm-hmm.
Did you get that? All right. So, what are you drinking today? By the way, the whole point of Larceny is because it's like the jailhouse theme, yes. You know? So that's why. That's why. It's got like a Lock and Key logo on it and everything.
Yeah. Quite often I try to find something in the movies to drink. And in these movies, I think in both of them, there's a couple like scenes where there's like light beer being drank. So I just went with some Mick Ultra for today. It's full disclosure though. full disclosure, I was prepared. I got our schedule mixed up, and I was prepared to talk about 2 other movies. So I have another 6-pack in the fridge for the next time we record. And I'll talk about what that is then.
Nice. Yeah. So my brother is so on top of his game, he's already preparing for the next episode. Actually asked me today, what the hell movies are we doing today? That's how far in advance he is preparing. Ever the professional. All right, so shall we begin?
We shall. Oh, wait, which one are we going with first?
Okay, we're going to do Raising Arizona first. We'll go chronological order.
Since it was the first one made
all right, so
in these 2.
It was the first of the 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, so here's the specs. 1987, directed by Joel Coen, written by Joel and Ethan Coen. A running time of 1 hour and 34 minutes, which I think is awesome because, while today's epics are always like 2.5-hour films, sometimes 3 hours, like these guys were pumping out movies. Fargo's another one that's not that long. They're pumping out movies that are only like 1.5 hours long. They really get to the meat of a story and then they get the hell out. You know what I mean? They don't linger. And I love that about the Coens. But okay, running time of 1 hour and 34 minutes. A budget of $6 million. Now, that's 1987 dollars. It was released on April 10th, 1987, and it made $22.8 million domestic, which was good for 52nd place on the domestic list that year. It got beat by roughly $700,000 by the 51st placed holder, Ernest Goes to Camp.
Oh my God.
So as you can see, Raising Arizona didn't necessarily blow the doors off at the box office. It garnered 0 Oscar nominations.
That's amazing.
However,
so, and what this movie has meant, like, culturally, I mean, it became a cult classic, and to realize, I mean, it didn't bomb at the box office. It made money. But holy cow.
Yeah, it was a success. Absolutely, It was a success. And it really plays into their next few films after that. I mean, I'm not going to go in order. I'll go a little bit out of order. So any Coen Brother fans, don't be like, that wasn't the next film. Yeah, okay. So I'm just going to bunch together like Miller's Crossing, Barton Fink, Hudsucker Proxy. They were all the same, made on shoestring budgets, and they turned profits. Mm-hmm. That's why the Coens kept getting contracts to make movies, allowed to make their films. So I will say, however, it did land at number 31 on the American Film Institute's top 100 comedies of all time.
That's amazing.
So, yeah, I mean, 31, I think it should be higher, but 31's not bad when you had no Oscar nominations and you didn't make hardly any money at the box office. To, like you said, its cultural impact is significant. Now, just a side note on that 100 comedies of all time. Some Like It Hot was number 1. Tootsie was number 2, and you got to go all the way down to number 10 before you get to Airplane. So, let's take it as a grain of salt. In my book, Airplane would be number 1, and Raising Arizona is probably in the top 10 if I had to do my top comedies of all time. So, all right, we'll just take that for what it is. Another side note on the box office: the top 10 films of that year, Three Men and a Baby was number 1 with $167 million.
Wow.
Followed by Fatal Attraction, Beverly Hills Cop 2, Good Morning Vietnam, Moonstruck, The Untouchables, Secret of My Success, Stakeout, Lethal Weapon, and The Witches of Eastwick. The reason why I wanted to bring this up, a couple of reasons. Number one, there's a couple of action films in there, Beverly Hills Cop 2 and Lethal Weapon. In today's market, those would have been the top 2 films.
Which Lethal Weapon was it?
1.
Well, he's the first one. Yeah.
Yeah. And you see all these other movies are all Oscar-laden movies.
Yeah.
Fatal Attraction, Good Morning Vietnam, Moonstruck, The Untouchables. You know what I mean? These are movies that win Oscars, and they were the top-grossing movies. It just goes to show how different the times are. Today, Transformers and Marvel and Disney's Star Wars, they make all the money, and the Oscars are won by movies like Past Lives and Anatomy of a Fall and American Fiction. You know what I mean? I mean, granted, this wasn't the best year for that example, since Oppenheimer and Barbie were 2 of the biggest movies of the year and kind of ruled the Oscar nominations. But still, the other side note on there, big year for Cher. She had 2 movies in that top 10 with Moonstruck and The Witches of Eastwick.
Yeah.
And she won Best Actress for Moonstruck that year. So big year for Cher in 1987, but we're not talking about Cher today. We're going to talk about Raising Arizona, which stars Nicolas Cage as H.I. McDonough, Holly Hunter as Edwina, Trey Wilson as Nathan Arizona Sr., which, by the way, I have to just tell you right now, Trey Wilson steals the show. He's fucking hilarious in every scene he's in as Nathan Sr. Frances McDormand as Honey. John Goodman as Gale Snotes, and his brother William Forsythe. He's not his actor. William Forsythe plays his brother Evil Snotes. Sam McMurray, of course, plays Glenn as well. So that's pretty much your top cast there. When was the first time you seen this movie? What's your experience with it?
I don't remember the first time. I mean, I might have seen it at the theater. It came out in 87, right?
Yeah.
87. April. So 87 is kind of a blur.
You were 11. You hadn't even turned 12. No, I was 11.
Yeah.
I was 11, hadn't even turned 12 yet.
I was partying. I was a teenager.
You were
and
15 and not yet turned 16, right?
Yeah.
Because your birthday's December.
Yeah. But I was, at 15, I was living like I thought I was 25.
Yeah. I remember those days. So no other explanation needed there. But when do you first remember?
But I remember I remember watching it. We probably rented it. I mean, I don't know if it was on cable, but I remember watching it at home like a lot because it was one of those movies that if it was on, you were going to watch it. No matter what you were doing. If it was on, you stopped, and that's what you were doing now.
Yeah.
It's like...
Yeah. It's like when I got into college, my buddy Hughes and I used to joke about we'd be hungover on a Sunday, like you partied all night Saturday, and it was non-football season, so there's no football on. We just lay around on the couch on Sunday, and if you put on TBS, they'd have like all Tom Cruise movies. Like they called it the Sunday Cruise. Or TNT or one of them would have Swayze Crazy on where it was all Patrick Swayze movies. That's what we were doing that day. That's it now. That's where I'm at. And Raising Arizona was like that, where if you're flipping around and it's on, guess what you're doing now? You're going to watch that.
Right.
I'm very similar with that. I remember being in a car. Again, I was 11. I hadn't quite turned 12 yet. But I was in a car. I want to say mom or dad were driving, and the radio was on. And, they were playing music and stuff. And then they went to a commercial. And the guy on the commercial was like, just released this week or whatever. He's doing a promo for it. It's called Raising Arizona. And I never heard of it, obviously. It just had come out. I wasn't, that knowledgeable about the actors at that time. Nicolas Cage and Holly Hunter were not huge names yet. But I remember the guy on the radio saying, "This is the most unique film I have ever seen." I remember saying, he's like, "Movies are going to change after this." I remember the guy on the radio fucking saying that.
That's amazing. Because I remember when I rewatched it, when did we watch that? When you were home on vacation. And I remember thinking to myself, I think I watched it a second time because I watched it. And then I told you, hey, let's watch this together. So in the last, month or so, I've watched it a couple of times. And I remember, like, the first time I had watched it in a long time, I'm watching it going, oh, my God. I mean, they made a comedy about people kidnapping a baby.
A baby. Yes. Fucking kidnapping a baby. And it's it's the 31st funniest movie of all time, according to the American Film Institute.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I remember, hearing that on the radio, I made it a point, like, somehow, some way, I got to see this movie. And yeah, like you, I think I waited for video or waited for it to come to cable or whatever. But once I saw it, our cousin, William, man, me and him used to quote this movie. Every time we saw each other, we'd be quoting Raising Arizona. Like, it was one of those films that was just the rewatchability of it is off the charts.
Right.
Even preparing for this show, I watched it a few times and I loved every time I watched it. I didn't get bored of it at all. All right, so log me.
All right. When a childless couple, an ex-con and an ex-cop, decide to help themselves to one of another family's quintuplets, their lives become more complicated than they anticipated.
Help themselves to another family's child.
Kills me. Decided to help themselves to
one
of another family's quintuplets.
Yeah, I'm just gonna take one, just one.
The way they rationalized it, man, it was so funny.
Yeah, so for anyone who hasn't seen Raising Arizona, if you can guess where it's going at this point, so a couple who can't have kids, kidnap a baby from a rich family that just had 5.
Yeah.
And which they say throughout the film, sort of their motif is, we thought you had more than you can handle. Like they rationalized that they were helping them by kidnapping one of the babies. Anyway, so right off the bat, before we get to the beats, I'm going to give you a little sidebar on the beats here. The Coens are notorious for knowing the rules of screenwriting and then breaking them. Mm-hmm. They understand structure, and yet they still deliver their story, but they always do it like in this unique way that deviates from structure. For instance, the credits aren't shown until 11 minutes into the movie.
Yeah.
There's an 11-minute setup. It's kind of like a montage of the audience. So you kind of get the idea of who these people are and what their goals are. And again, that happens before the friggin' opening credits.
Yeah.
11-minute montage. Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay. We have the beats. All right, opening image. Hi McDonough introduced as he's getting his mugshot taken by Edwina. This is how the movie starts. He's already been arrested. The love story is set up almost immediately when he calls her a little desert flower, and that gets her attention. We proceed. By the way, I read the actual screenplay, which is available online. Mm-hmm. There is no mention in the screenplay that this is working on Edwina. The flirtation. It just says everything that Hi says, and the scene ends. When you watch the movie, though, they have shots of Ed, like, noticing this, right? Like, she's catching the attention already.
Yeah.
None of that's in the script, which I thought was interesting. It doesn't say anywhere in the script, like, Ed notices, or Ed smiles, or Ed's happy. Yeah. Ed, of course, short for Edwina. But it's clearly there in the film.
Yeah.
So now we proceed with that 11-minute setup before the opening credits that includes the rule of three. I want to explain this for anyone that doesn't know the rule of three. So the rule of three in writing, it's a repetition technique, right? And the idea is you do something once, you do it again, like a second time, only it's a little bit different. And then the third time, it's very different, sometimes almost a reversal, but it's where it's almost like a punchline of a joke. It's where it's even funnier the third time. So the rule of three is actually in all writing. It's not screenwriting. It's actually in life, too. Like people use the rule of three when they give speeches. They use the rule of three, in anything. So the Coens use it specifically. Let me see if I wrote down how many times they do it. So they use the rule of three at least 4 times in the first 11-minute montage. So I'm going to break up the montage, by the way, into the first 6 minutes and the next 5 minutes. The reason why I'm breaking them up is because I have them there are 2 different montages what I consider. The first 6 minutes I call the Recidivism montage, and that's High's criminal past. Okay. Now, you got to remember, they're cramming all this in 11 minutes so that you get to know who these people are, right? And then the next 5 minutes after that is sort of what I call the Salad Days montage. It's where Hi and Ed are together. Mm-hmm. So in the first montage, we have 3 moments of the first rule of 3 is the mugshots fingerprinting. Mm-hmm. There's a rule of 3 for the off-screen cop telling Edwina not to forget something. There's a rule of 3 for the parole board. The guys that say, okay, then. Yes. And then there's a rule of 3 of every time he walks by the mopping convict in prison.
Okay.
And then actually there's another one too, the rule of 3 of what I call contemplating prison life with a twist. So I'm going to break all 3 of these down. So the mugshot fingerprinting, the very first time is the first scene in the movie where a Hi calls Ed a desert flower. The second time we see him being mugshotted, Ed is crying because her fiance left her, and Hi sticks up for her. Mm-hmm. Remember that part? You tell him, I think he's a damn fool. You tell him, Hi, McDonough said so. You know what I mean? And then the third time is the fingerprinting. It's not the mugshotting, but it's the fingerprinting where he puts a promise ring on her finger. Mm-hmm. Right? So the off-screen cop, first time we hear him, don't forget his profile, Ed. That's where she's like, turn to the right, right? Mm-hmm. The second time we hear him, is she said, you hear the off-screen cop go, don't forget his phone call, Ed. And then on the third one, right before on the third time when he goes to put the promise ring on her, don't forget his fingerprints, Ed. So that's the rule of 3 there too as well. So now we have the mopping prisoner who growls at Hi every time he walks by. The first time he does it, if you notice, he's way far in the back of the corridor. Like he's just started mopping the corridor. Yeah. The second time we see him, he's about halfway up. Right? The third time we see him, he's already all the way up to the front. He's almost done mopping the floor. And High walks by and goes, "Missed a spot." So the concept there is that it took him the entire time of High's constantly going to prison, getting released, going to prison, getting released, for this guy to mop the floor.
Right.
Like,
you missed a spot.
Right. And then another time is so the last one was the contemplating prison life with a twist. The twist here is where they switch his method of coping. What I mean by that is the first time they show him he's in group therapy in prison. The second time, it's half group therapy and then half the crawdad guy. You ate what? We ate sand. You ate sand? You know what I mean? And then the third time is just the crawdad guy. No more therapy. It's just where he's laying there with like guys rambling on. High is laying in bed thinking about Ed. So this use of repetition, the rule of three, is to develop the first 6 minutes of the film into where the audience is completely aware of who these people are, particularly High, because we're learning about them so quickly. You know what I mean? That's what the rule of three does. The repetition gets you the idea of this is regular life, right? This is how it goes for him, including the parole board. I forgot to even mention the parole board. There's a rule of three with the parole board where every time they end it, the guy ends it with, like I said, okay then, right? But even those are different because there's different statements in each one. The reason why I saved that one for the end is because this is where you're going to get our theme stated. So on the third and final visit to the parole board, one of the board members asks, "You're not just telling us what we want to hear, are you, High?" And he says, "No, sir." And the board member says, "Because all we want is the truth." And then High is a little befuddled and he goes, "Well, then I guess I am telling you what you want to hear."
Yeah.
Frustrated board. And the board member's all, "Boy, didn't we just tell you not to do that?"
That was hilarious.
This is High's theme because trying to make other people happy will be both his downfall and his saving grace. Sometimes he's the selfish convenience store robber who only cares about himself, and sometimes he tries too hard to make other people happy or at least pleased with him. You know where I'm going with the Snotes brothers, right? This all is going to play come into play here. This emotional tug of war, which we've talked about before, definitely comes into play with the Snotes when they crash at his place. He can't make them and his wife happy. Right? It's got to be one or the other, but he tries so hard to make everybody happy. This, of course, leads to self-sacrifice. When you give up your own welfare for another person, that's going to be High's battling towards his spiritual goal. So the next 5 minutes, which I call the salad days montage, is after he walks in and he proposes, right? So now we're in the post-wedding marital bliss part. The narrated montage of happy married life, where this is what Blake Snyder, of course, would call at work, at home, at play, right? So they show him at work, we show him at home, you know what I mean? We show him watering the lawn and stuff. There's another rule of play here where they watch the sunset. He's watering the bushes, she's knitting, he works at the sheet metal plant. So that's the at work, at home, at play. By the way, I don't know if you noticed, in those work scenes, the name on his uniform says Hudsucker Industries. So they're already laying out their plans to make the Hudsucker Proxy, which is a movie that would come out years later. I always thought that was a cool little thing there. All right, so 4-point push. Now, this is something that I've I don't want to say I've coined because all these terms are already known. If there's anything that I coined, it's calling it the 4-point push. So I think that all the best screenplays have 4 points. We always talk about the 5-point finale. I believe that the first act should have 4 undisputed points, which will drive the character to the second act. Okay? Some movies have some movies have 1, some movies have a lot, but they should all at least have 4. More than that is fine. When we talk the double bump is usually an added one. That's like a 5th one. The more beats, the better. Right? Because you're creating this, you want the main character to have to be forced to make a decision, right? Lazy writing is where they just sort of drift into act 2 and there's no driving force. Right. So my points of the 4-point push are the inciting incident, which is the first hint that the before world is about to change. Okay, so there's always been a lot of confusion between inciting incident and catalyst. Well, which one's the catalyst? Which one's the inciting incident? In movies like Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's even harder to identify because in Raiders of the Lost Ark, there's simply one catalyst and nothing else. The FBI agents meet with him and tell him about Hitler's plan to get the Ark. And then, like, the next scene, he's already decided he wants to go for it. He's waiting for them to give him the okay.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's no debate. Indiana Jones doesn't have to debate if he wants to go after something, right? It's just like, that's the catalyst, and the next scene, he's on his way to Cairo. You know? In that movie, it works, though. It works in that movie. But in most films, you want more than that. There's got to be more of something to really push the character into Act 2. So the inciting incident is kind of like the first hint that the before world is about to change. Catalyst, that's the next one. That's the second point. That's the big thing that happens that crashes into the before world. It's no longer just a hint. This is something big. The debate begins is the will they, won't they? Right? That's the debate. Will they decide to go into Act 2 or will they not? And, of course, the fourth point is the break into 2, which is the thing that happens that causes Act 2 to begin. So, like I said, all the best films should have all 4 of these. Some of them only have 1. But in the case, you know, not everybody's going to be good enough to write Raiders of the Lost Ark. You know what I mean? So if you're writing a screenplay, make sure you have your 4-point push. And if you have a double bump, that makes it 5 points, even better. The more points, the better. Inciting incident, if we're not going to get into double bump, but again, it's another Blake Snyder term where the first catalyst isn't enough. Sometimes they need 2, right? They need something else. We've often talked about Star Wars being the double bump. Inciting incident. Roughly 8 minutes in, a crying Ed returns home and tells Hi she's barren and cannot have kids. This isn't enough, by the way, to catapult them into Act 2. They need all 4 points of these 4-point push. Here's the next one. Catalyst. The adoption agency rejections. Depressed Hi drives by convenience stores. A pivotal moment of where is their future headed. By the way, the scene where the adoption agency rejects them is kind of hilarious. It's where she's like, they're looking at their history, and Edwina's all, we realize Hi has a checkered past, and then Hi's all, but Ed here's a officer of the law, twice decorated, so we figure it kind of evens out. And then they show his rap sheet of all the times he's been arrested. It's like, of course they're not going to approve his adoption. Okay, so debate begins. That's when they discover Nathan Arizona and his wife have given birth to 5 babies. They immediately come to, we figure they had more than they can handle, right? They don't need all 5 of those babies. So that's where they start to plan and plot. And, of course, the break into 2 is literally the credit sequence. It's basically the break into 2. It's because they've made the decision, and now they're going into Act 2 to kidnap one of these babies. And your credits start. So think of how different that is from just about every other movie we've ever talked about. Where they wait 11 minutes to show the title of the movie. And in the first 11 minutes, there's 2 separate montages. One of Hi's past, one of Hi and Ed together. And can't you admit that at that 11-minute mark when the credits start, we know everything we need to know about these 2?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Everything. We know everything about them. God, so how fucking brilliant is that? All right, so fun and games, always the first part of Act 2. Kidnapping scene and the ensuing first night at home. And now they're officially in the upside-down world version of Act 1, right? Because now they got a baby at home, and now they have to be responsible adults. Ironically, the next scene, the Snotes boys escape from prison. It's another funny way to escape prison, just the way that they do it. They get themselves a car, and they go to Hi's house, immediately.
Their escape from prison reminded me of Shawshank, but that came out after this came out.
Yes, that came out, 8 years after?
Something like that.
7 years? 7 years later? 7 years later, but it's hilarious the way they do it. They're screaming the whole time. You would think, and the screaming is going to be a thing with these 2 guys because they do it again at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
When they're in the car and they keep leaving the baby behind, but but when they escape from prison, it's like you'd think they'd want to be as quiet as possible, but they're fucking screaming at the top of their lungs as they break out of the sewer line. So anyway, they represent the childish and selfish nature of Hi, whereas Ed represents the decent and responsible nature. See where we're going here? We're already going into Hi's tug of war. It's no mistake that these scenes are back to back. They come home with the baby, and the very next scene, the Snotes escape from prison. That's not an accident. B story at the 27-minute mark. This is an interesting B story for me. So remember when we talk about B story, the B story is the character that's going to drive your protagonist to their spiritual goal. A lot of times it's a love interest, right? The love interest is usually introduced at this point. Guess who I have as being the B story for Raising Arizona? You can disagree. Others can disagree. I think there's solid evidence that at the 27-minute mark, Leonard Smalls, the biker from hell, arrives in the film. He, oddly enough, is going to serve as the B story because ultimately he's going to drive high to his. And if you wanted to talk timing, the timing actually does follow Blake Snyder's beat sheet because, 27 minutes is kind of right after the break into 2. Mm-hmm. Usually the B story is introduced right after your break into 2. All right, more fun and games. We round out the first half of Act 2 with the investigation into Nathan Jr.'s kidnapping, tension during breakfast between the Snotes and Edwina, then finally the Glenn and Honey visit, which is Sam McMurray and Frances McDormand. And that, oddly enough, is also broken up into 3 segments. Another rule of 3. Mm-hmm. First part is we meet Glenn, and we get a good feel of this guy. 2, the dip test and insurance discussion with Honey and Edwina. Which, by the way, I got to stop. Well, I'll just tell you the third one. And the third one, of course, is the wife swapping discussion where High punches out Glenn. So that's like a 3-scene rule of 3 of meeting Glenn and Honey. What's funny about Honey, Frances McDormand, when she first sees the baby and she's all, oh, look at this baby. Oh, he's so good. It's like a total baby talk to the baby. And then in like an instant, looks at Edwina and goes, so you're going to send him to Arizona State. Just out of the blue. And just what made me laugh so hard about that is like, that's kind of like how we in Michigan, like when a baby is born, like, oh, he's going to go to Michigan, right? Like we just automatically, we start thinking about which college they're going to go to, Michigan or Michigan State, right? So when I heard that, I just started rolling. Yeah. All right, midpoint scene. 45 minutes into the film, almost exactly halfway through an hour and a half movie, High robs another convenience store for money and Huggies. And it sets off the events of the big car chase, which I think is one of the best chase scenes ever, as he eludes not only cops, but dogs and an armed convenience store clerk. Yes. And a shoot-happy grocery store manager as well, not to mention the shoot-happy cops, who don't seem to care about whatever might be in the background of whatever they're shooting at. They're just firing at houses. They're firing at cars. They're firing at anything just to get to High. So here's his tangible goal. Now remember, his tangible goal was wanting to provide for his family, and he prevails. It's a false victory. He does, in fact, get the money and the Huggies. Right. So technically, he is a success, but it's a false victory because now his wife is pissed off because he's going back to that recidivism again. Right. And of course, the happiness, the false victory is short-lived, because the bad guys closing in is always what comes right after the midpoint. And immediately upon arriving home, Ed has it out with the Snotes, effectively kicking them out in the morning. And, they have a better idea. They want to recruit High for a bank robbery. So it's already now all starting to go to shit. More bad guys closing in scenes as High writes and narrates a goodbye note for Ed. Leonard Smalls shakes down Nathan Sr., and finally, Glenn arrives with some bad news, and that he knows who the baby is. Mm. By the way, in that scene, I don't know if you ever noticed, in the back window of Glenn's station wagon, there's a sticker on the window decal that says, "Caution, I drive naked."
I never noticed that.
This is a guy who's got a wife and 5 kids, or 4 kids, however many of those annoying kids that they have, and he's got that on his window.
It's hilarious.
All right, all is lost. At the 1 hour, 5-minute mark, the Snote brothers turn on High because they want the reward money for the baby. They trash his place and steal the baby, kidnapped away from the kidnappers. Another rule of 3, by the way, is introduced at this point. This late in the movie, at the all is lost, the Coen brothers are initiating another rule of 3. Remember which one it is? The baby book. Oh, yeah. So after Gale leaves, High is all tied up, and he's screaming, and he tips over. Yeah. Gale re-enters, but he only comes in to get the baby book. The sort of like the instructions on how to raise a baby, right? Later, after they rob the bank and the dye pack explodes, Ed looks for the baby book when they get inside the car. And then, of course, the third one is when they return the baby at the end. I'm jumping the gun here, but I just wanted to explain the rule of 3 on this one. When they return the baby at the end, they return the baby book. Yeah. It's like it's their instructions on how to raise a baby. Yeah. All right. So Dark Night of the Soul. Ed sees that the Snotes have fled, and she feels relieved until she gets home and sees that she has to free High and that the baby is gone. Break into 3. High reasons with Ed about how right she was and how wrong he was when he racks his shotgun. Now let's go get Nathan Jr. Just before Evil robs the convenience store and he makes the old man count to 825 and then back down to 0.
Yeah.
Which is funny because they leave the baby behind. So then when the old man's halfway through counting, he's all, oh, the hell with this. And he gets up and they're coming back.
Yeah.
Screaming. And he's like, oh, shit. So he gets back down and keeps counting.
Yep.
Anyway. All right. 5-point finale. We're in Act 3 now. 5-point finale. Gathering the team. High and Ed are in the car. They discuss not only getting Nathan back, but likely breaking up. They're just not good for each other. Execution of the plan for all involved, actually. This is a good execution of the plan for everyone. Smalls arrives at the McDonough home. The Snotes have taken Nathan Jr. on a bank heist with them. After the dye pack explodes, however, like I said, Ed will retrieve the baby book. By the way, in that scene where the dye pack explodes, there obviously was a real exploding device of some kind when they shot the movie, because when you see John Goodman's character yells at Evil, damn it, you never leave a man behind, when they realize the baby's gone, both of them are wearing earplugs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I never noticed that until I did this rewatch. And I've seen this movie 20 times.
Right.
But when I was rewatching it for this, they're both wearing earplugs in that scene.
Wow.
Hightower surprise. Smalls shows up and snatches the baby. Smalls is reminiscent, sort of, like, this is a bit of a reach here, but I'm going to go with it. Smalls is a little reminiscent of Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men, another Coen Brothers classic, as he's the embodiment of pure evil. This connection will show up later in the dream sequence in both films. I'll talk about that after. But, okay, so dig down deep. Both Ed and High attempt to retrieve the baby from Smalls, who gives chase with his motorcycle. Execution of the new plan. High must fight Smalls and win in order to secure the baby safely. During this fight, he sees that he has the same Woody Woodpecker tattoo that Smalls does. This is significant because Smalls represents the evil nature of High. And if High doesn't change his ways, he could end up possibly having that sort of future for himself.
Right.
You know, we talk about our friends over at Writers Blockbusters, the script butcher himself, Jimmy George, and one of his podcasts where he talks about nightmare fuel aspects, one of the things that he says their main character will have to face their biggest fear in order to succeed. It's the line he uses is, I'll do anything I need to do to achieve the goal except the one thing I have to do, right? One of his examples is in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Indiana Jones is willing to do anything, but he hates snakes. Well, what happens to be in the entire inside of the Well of Souls where the Ark is? Snakes, right? So in this case, High has to fight Smalls to the death.
Yeah.
Which would be his ultimate fear.
Yeah.
Right? So he's, High is willing to do...
Yeah, because he's even having nightmares about it.
Right. So it's almost like High is like, I'll do whatever I have to do to get the baby back, except the one thing I have to do, which is fight Leonard Smalls to the death, who he's terrified of. So climax, High succeeds. He's fighting Leonard Smalls, gets the shit kicked out of him, by the way. I mean, Smalls just beats the living shit out of him, but then his last punch launches him like 10 feet away.
Yeah.
And that's when he reveals he's holding a pin from one of the grenades that's on Leonard Smalls' jacket. Smalls blows up.
Wait, before he blows up, Nick Cage looks at him and goes, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
That part kills me every time.
Yeah, he's laying there. His eyes are swollen shut. He's bleeding from every orifice, and he lifts up the pin. And when Smalls looks down and sees the grenade and looks back at him, yeah, he apologizes. So great. Okay, so High blows up Smalls. By doing that, he achieves his spiritual goal of risking personal life and limb for another. In this case, his wife and child. The most selfless act he could give. And then they return the baby to Nathan Sr. High even says to Nathan Sr. about why they're splitting up. He's like, we're just too selfish and unrealistic. And Nathan Sr. says, well, you brought back my boy, so you must have your good points too. End quote. Closing image, High has his dream, a futuristic, hopeful vision of himself. By the way, the entire dream is selfless as he's focusing on what is best for everybody else in his life. That final dream sequence, by the way, I told you I would talk about it. I mentioned earlier the connection to the end of No Country for Old Men. Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen that movie. When Tommy Lee Jones is retelling the dream he had to his wife. So he has a dream, and at the end, the movie ends with him telling his dream to his wife. The dream is way more somber, right? It's about seeing his long-deceased father. And in the dream, his father goes on ahead and tells him he'll meet him there and builds a fire, and he knows he'll see him again. It's an obvious metaphor for afterlife, and that Tommy Lee Jones, having survived the wrath of evil that is Anton Chigurh, realizes his own mortality and that he too will die someday. Didn't High pretty much do the same thing? Like, he faced his evil, which was Leonard Smalls, and survived. But the stark contrast is that his dream is hopeful and uplifting,
Right.
of a possible happy future. Okay, trivia. 13 babies are credited for playing the Arizona Quints, including Nathan Jr. Apparently, there were as many as 15 at one point, though one was eventually fired during filming because he learned how to walk.
That's hilarious.
Frances McDormand and Holly Hunter were roommates at the Yale School of Drama in 1982.
Do you think that baby has to, like, forevermore, he had to admit on job applications, that he had been fired from another job?
Maybe, but I think it would be a good one. You could say I was one of the babies. I was originally one of the babies in Raising Arizona. Frances McDormand and Holly Hunter were roommates at the Yale School of Drama in 1982. They would both appear together in the Coen Brothers' first film, Blood Simple, 1984, although Holly Hunter really only appears as a voice on a phone call. She's a message left on the phone. Also in that film, Blood Simple, is M. Emmett Walsh, and the musical score was done by Carter Burwell. Both of them, Carter Burwell and Frances McDormand, that was their first film, by the way, was Blood Simple. But all four of them, Holly Hunter, Frances McDormand, M. Emmett Walsh, and the composer Carter Burwell, would join together for the Coen Brothers' next film, which was this one, Raising Arizona. All four of them appear in it. Between them, Holly Hunter and Frances McDormand now have 5 Academy Awards.
Wow.
Though Franny is winning heavily. She's up 4-1 right now on Oscars.
Yeah, right.
3 of them for Best Actress, and she has a 4th Oscar for, she was the producer of the Best Picture winning Nomadland. Holly Hunter, of course, has 1 Best Actress Oscar for The Piano. Coincidentally, Carter Burwell, who did the music, also did the music for Fargo, and he has 3 total Oscar nominations, but he has yet to win one. There is another rule of 3 moment that I forgot to mention when the cops pull somebody away from something. Opening image, High is pulled away by a cop while he's flirting with Ed. In the second, High is pulled away again when he's sticking up for Ed. The first 2 mugshot scenes, a cop keeps pulling him away. And the third one is Nathan Sr.'s being pulled away by the cops when he's trying to talk to the media. So it seems that's a running rule of 3 in this one where the cops pull somebody away. A couple more funny lines in the film. A film that's loaded with funny lines. But just a couple that I had to write down. The cops are interrogating Nathan Sr. Do you have any disgruntled employees? Nathan says, oh, hell, they're all disgruntled. Now, as a retail manager, I can respect that. In the same scene, the cop asks, what would the child's jammies look like? And first of all, it's important to note that the child wasn't in any jammies. He was just wearing a diaper.
Right.
But to answer the question, he says, oh, yeah, this is a quote. I don't know. They were jammies. They had Yodas and shit on them.
Right.
When the Snotes are talking about how they found out about the hayseed bank that they're going to rob on that particular Friday, why they need to do it on that Friday, because all that cash was there to cover farmers' subsidy checks.
Yeah.
Gail says, we got it in a joint from a guy named Lawrence Spivey, one of Dick Nixon's undersecretaries of agriculture. And then Evel says, he's in for soliciting sex from a state trooper. And then Gail says, ordinarily we don't associate with that type of person, but he was trying to score some brownie points. It's kind of like that Pulp Fiction-esque of honor among lowlives, you know what I mean? Like, even these hardened criminals, they have a line they rarely cross, and they don't associate with sex offenders. So, okay, music playing a factor as a character. As Edwina helps to calm a restless Nathan Jr. from a bad dream, she carries him gently around the bedroom humming a soothing lullaby. That song, Down in the Willow Garden, that's the name of the song, is actually about the murder of a girl.
Oh, wow.
Composer Carter Burwell uses it as an instrumental version. He also uses it in the final dream sequence.
Wow.
Roger Ebert's criticism. I remember telling you that when we did the Die Hard episode, he gave Die Hard a thumbs down. Guess what? He also gave a thumbs down.
Wow.
You guessed it. Raising Arizona. He gave it 1.5 stars, which is a thumbs down, mostly because of the dialogue. He said he felt the dialogue came out ridiculous for these characters when they say things like over yonder. You know what I mean? Like it just, for him, it didn't match a low rent criminal like Hi McDonough, right? All right, we're going to do a fun exercise here. Real quick, that 11-minute pre-credits setup that I was talking about, right? The before the credits 11-minute montage has its own beat sheet.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Opening image and setup. Hi is a criminal, and Ed, in this situation, in this beat sheet, Ed is the B-story love interest. Catalyst. Ed's fiance leaves her. Hi sticks up for her, and she falls for him. Break into 2 and fun and games. Montage of Hi's prison life and puts a promise ring on Edwina. More fun and games. Hi gets paroled and proposes to Ed. Midpoint scene is the wedding. Don't forget the bouquet, Ed. By the way, that's the cop, the off-screen cop. Actually, at a rule of 3, he throws a 4th one in there, but that one is the wedding. Yeah. And this is their tangible goal for both of them, to get married. Bad guys closing in. Mundane work at the sheet metal plant, watching the sunrise and the salad days. All is lost. Hi, I'm barren. Dark Night of the Soul. The doctor explains why she can't have kids with pictures. Break into 3 and the gathering of the team, deciding to have a baby one way or another. Execution of the plan. Adoption agency fails. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I put adoption agency, but the Hightower surprise comes right after that. The adoption agency denies them based on High's checkered past. Dig down deep, losing all drive to housekeeping, and Ed resigns from being a cop. And then execution of the new plan. They abduct the baby born to a large family in order to start their own family. So as you see, the beats sort of flow, even in that 11-minute pre-credit montage.
Yeah, that's great.
Extra note on the tattoo. This is my last point on Raising Arizona. We mentioned earlier about how Hi and Smalls have the same tattoo, right? And that they represent sort of opposite sides of the same coin. Often the hero's counterpart, the bad guy, is just like him, right? It's just like him or her. It's the choices that they make that steer them down one road as opposed to another. As mentioned, if Hi continued down this path of lawlessness, he too could end up like Smalls. Mm-hmm. Similarly, in the same year, 1987, Lethal Weapon came out, and they used the exact same concept. Both Martin Riggs, Mel Gibson, the good guy, and Mr. Joshua, played by Gary Busey, the bad guy, they have the exact same Special Forces tattoo. This signifies that they are the opposite sides of the same coin. And
I forgot about that.
And if Mel didn't make the choices that he made to become a cop and be righteous, it's possible he could have ended up like Mr. Joshua. He could have been a thug for criminals. After his wife died and he dove deeper into suicidal tendencies and alcoholism, he could have eventually become Mr. Joshua. But Roger, Danny Glover's role, is the one that sort of crashes into his life and keeps him on the straight and narrow, just like Edwina does for Hi. Other examples, Indiana Jones and Belloc. They're both archaeologists, but one uses it for evil, one uses it for good. Batman and Joker, you could argue they're both insane, right? Because they need alter egos to survive. They are both kind of cut from the same cloth. Only one has chosen the path of good and one has chosen the path of evil. I got in a discussion recently with somebody online. I get into these movie thread arguments all the time. And the subject of the movie was Falling Down. Remember Falling Down?
Yep.
And I used this concept. I said, the character that Michael Douglas plays, his name's Defense. He is the opposite side of the coin of Prendergast, which Robert Duvall's character plays, right? They're both frustrated with society. They both feel unappreciated and disrespected by both their peers and their family, particularly their wives. They're practically the same person, but they've chosen different paths. And if Prendergast had continued to go down this path, maybe he becomes the guy who gets frustrated out of his car one day and says, fuck it, and snaps. Right? So I love that element, that it's the I can't remember what they call it, but it's kind of like, the two sides of the same coin.
It's a clever technique because people tend to try to, they try to identify with the good nature in somebody. Like they might see something in themselves or they want to be like that guy. And then to realize, oh shit, I could become like the other guy. So it's a good technique because it gives you, a bit of empathy for a character.
Not only that, that's a huge part, that it raises the empathy you might have for the villain. But you know what it also does is it raises the stakes for your hero.
Right. That's what I mean.
Because if they make wrong choices, they could end up like that.
Yep.
You know, another perfect example is that movie SWAT with Colin Farrell.
Mm-hmm.
Jeremy Renner is in that movie as the bad guy. They were partners at the beginning of the movie. They were partners at the beginning of the movie. You know what I mean? So, like, the bad thing happened where they split off, and now one's the bad guy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, they're basically the same guy, but one's good and one's bad. Anything else to wrap up Raising Arizona?
No, I love it. Just if you haven't seen it in a while, or if you've never seen it, please do yourself a favor.
Yeah.
Just when you go on, you know, whatever, Amazon or whatever, just buy it.
Yeah, that's one of those.
You're going to want to watch it again.
There are a few of those. There are a few of those in my life where before I even see the movie, I buy it just because I know. I just know I'm going to like it, right?
I should get a cut for the advertisement, but whatever.
So, Fargo.
Well, hold on. We're going to land the plane and then start anew because we're going to try and release this in 2 segments.
Yeah, we thought maybe with all the fun, and there's a lot more craft on Fargo. If you thought I talked a lot on Raising Arizona, I've got more craft for Fargo.
Yeah.
So, folks, we've decided to break this up like we did with Silence of the Lambs and Midsommar. We're going to break this up into 2, but we're going to save 6 degrees for the end of the segment.
Yeah, I was going to just mention that. We're going to save our 6 degrees for the end. Should we tease what they're going to be? That way maybe someone can do their homework and see if they could figure it out before they hear the next episode.
Ooh.
You want to do that?
Interesting concept. Now, okay, this one, we usually like to make them as hard as possible.
Yeah.
So our first thought was, do we pick the 2 kids, right? Scotty Lundegaard in Fargo, and, of course, Nathan Jr. But the problem with Nathan Jr., who plays the baby, one of the 15 babies that they use to play the baby.
The one that gets the credits.
The one that gets the credit. He has no other film credits.
Right.
So we decided instead.
I think he's got an upcoming project, though. He's going to be in a documentary about this movie.
Oh, really? That's awesome. So we went ahead and who did you pick? You picked
for Raising Arizona.
Smalls.
Yeah, Smalls.
Leonard Smalls. So Leonard Smalls, the dirty biker.
Yeah. And side note, I mentioned this to my brother before we hit record. Smalls, the biker, reminds me of one of my best friends in high school's dad. And we were terrified of that man. If you know the actor, you know why. He was just a big, scary dude. Didn't talk to the kids much, you know.
Well, I'll tell you. Speaking of things that remind you of something of the past, this recidivism part that I talked about, that actually reminds me. Every time I hear it, I think of my friend. I'm going to do a shout out here to Dave Asalo, who I grew up with in high school. Dave. Actually, it was grade school. He went down to Florida for high school. But I remember him telling me this story. Dave and I were very similar in school. We daydreamed. You know what I mean? We thought about movies. We drew pictures of movie posters. We didn't pay attention at all. My grades probably could have been a hell of a lot better if I actually paid attention. But we were dreamers. But this is an example of how movies do teach you things. Mm-hmm. Dave told me the story where he was in class. I want to say it was in high school. And he's not paying attention as usual. He's daydreaming. But they somehow were talking about the law, and the teacher said, there's a term called recidivism. Does anyone know what that is? And Dave yells out, repeat offender, just like the guy in the movie says, because he's seen Raising Arizona 1,000 times and knows it back and forth. So when he heard that movie, he immediately said out loud, repeat offender. And the teacher goes, yes, that's right. Good job, Dave. All because he'd seen this movie so much.
Yeah, that's great.
So that's awesome. I forgot about that story, but every time I hear it now, I think of that story that he told me. The one time he shined in his class.
Yeah.
All right, so let's land this plane before we take off in the connecting flight.
All right.
Keep drinking and keep watching.
Yeah, and go support your local cinemas.